nutrition. So this is where, in essence, it's a critical process of the whole idea of digestion is getting these different nutrients, these molecules that our body needs, and getting them then distributed to the cells that need them. And so we're looking at those molecules that we've been talking about along the way, carbohydrates and proteins and lipids and nucleic acids. And in fact, the essential nutrients are going to be those that can't be synthesized by human cells. So there are, in some cases, where you can, for instance, make glucose starting from proteins. It is possible to do that. If you break down these molecules, these organic molecules, to small enough building blocks, the cell can synthesize a lot of what they need. But they need to kind of rejuvenate the molecules that they've been using, and in some cases, like we talked about with the essential vitamins and nutrients and things like that, those are not possible for the body to synthesize, so they need to come directly from the diet at all times. All right, so let's do our review here then. Carbohydrates was our first one. And so carbohydrates, like we said, are going to start out from polysaccharides, right, to monosaccharides. So the best example that we've been talking about is glucose, but there's also, like I said, sucrose and maltose and fructose and lactose and things like that. So these are oftentimes used for energy because, like I said, the digestive product in terms of like a monosaccharide is going to be something like glucose. We know that mitochondria is used, or the cell uses glucose ultimately to start that whole ATP production process. Okay, so we've got carbohydrates, we've got lipids, and as we talked about before, one of the most common dietary lipids are going to be triglycerides, which we said that those are finally going to break down to our monoglycerides, right, plus our fatty acids. I'm going to pen on the screen. It's a little too sensitive. So we're going to break down triglycerides to monoglycerides and fatty acids. We're going to use things like lipase. We saw, the pancreatic lipase. We saw other lipases coming in the small intestine and the brush borders and those microvilli. And then we said also it's going to be critical to be able to digest lipids. We're going to need that bile from the gallbladder and then also a little bit from the liver in order to fully digest our fats, our lipids. So usually within lipids we've got a number of different molecules, like we said, triglycerides, fats, phospholipids, like we talked about before, that make up the lipid bilayer of our different cells, and cholesterol also counts as a lipid. Now, we've mentioned cholesterol in a few places, and remember that it's not a horrible thing. Too much of anything can be bad, but cholesterol is very necessary as a part of our lipid bilayers for all of our different cells. It's also a critical component to be able to make our whole class of steroid hormones, so testosterone and estrogen and cortisol and aldosterone and stuff like that, are all based off of cholesterol. These triglycerides that we mentioned, which are such a common lipid, are found in both plant and animal-based foods. But of course, you have different types of fats or triglycerides in those foods. So you hear about saturated fats. So saturated fats are more animal origin, and unsaturated fats are more from plant origin. And what they're usually talking about there is when we look at those fatty acid chains, the question of those chains are made up of a bunch of carbon molecules with hydrogens attached to them. And the question of the both saturated and unsaturated has to do with when we're attaching those carbons together, whether we have like double bonds like this, when we were talking about bonding elements together, or whether it's single bonds, kind of like this. So if it's single bonds, and it's going to have a bunch of hydrogen ions attached to it instead. And if it's double bonds, then those double bonds are going to be occupied attaching the carbons together instead. So the saturated and unsaturated have to do whether it's saturated or unsaturated with like the hydrogen ions there or the double bonds. And really, saturated fats tend to be those that are a little bit harder for your body to break down. Saturated fats tend to be a solid at room temperature. So if you think about butter itself or lard or something like that, or even, you think about the fats like we talked about along the edges of steak, those are going to be more saturated fats, and they tend to be more of animal origin. Unsaturated fats tend to be more of a liquid at room temperature. So you think about the oils like sunflower oil, corn oil, olive oil, stuff like that. Okay, and then cholesterol, like I said, which is necessary for our body, is found only in foods of animal origin. You just want to make sure that you don't get too much of it. Proteins, like we said, proteins are going to be the big polymer, and we said that those are going to break into our peptides. If we chop them up, we're going to break them into peptide chains. P-E-P-T-I-D-E. P-E-P, there's a T there somewhere, T-I-D-E, yes. And so the peptides then are going to be what? When we chop those up, we're going to end up with amino acids. So remember, we have the 20 amino acids that we can use to synthesize peptides and proteins. It all depends on what amino acids we're using and what sequence as to what that protein will do, what it looks like, etc. And we said that proteins are really important in the body. They can be used for energy, but we said all those enzymes that we've been talking about associated with digestion, those are all made of protein. A lot of the hormones are made of protein. All those antibodies that we talked about, clotting factors that end up, activating fibrinogen into fibrin. Even the fibrin itself, right, is a protein. So lots of different uses in the body for protein. So we got to be able to synthesize those proteins. So there's also different categories of proteins you can get out of your diet that are what are called complete proteins, which have all what are called the essential amino acids. So again, with some of those amino acids, when we say essential, that means that your body can't synthesize it. No matter if you give very simple building blocks, it can't actually manufacture it internally. So there's a number of amino acids that are essential ones that you have to get from your diet. And when you are eating animal proteins, you're getting complete proteins that contain those. And you can imagine, right, you said that animal protein, that's going to come from muscle, right? So when you go to the meat department, you're looking at muscle. So it's high protein and it's complete protein. But, of course, you can also, if you're vegetarian or something like that, you, of course, can also get protein from plant sources. But what you get in plant sources of protein are, the protein content can be there in terms of number of grams, but getting all of those different 20 amino acids to make sure that your body has what it needs for building blocks is a little bit more difficult because those plant proteins are what are called incomplete proteins. They don't contain all of the amino acids that you need. And so, for instance, if you have a vegetarian diet, not only do you have to eat high-protein food like tofu and stuff like that, and beans, etc., but you've got to make sure that it's diverse as well. So, for instance, if you had a diet where your main protein source was beans, you could be taking in enough beans to get enough of your, whatever, 60 grams or how many ever grams you needed of protein a day, but you wouldn't be getting the diverse amino acids that you needed. So if you have a diet that has beans and corn in it, even though corn has a lot of carbohydrates, it does have protein in it as well, and it's got a complementary set of amino acids. So if you have beans and corn, then you'll be getting the full set of amino acids that you need, those essential ones. There's also other ways you can do it. You find when you go to like Trader Joe's and stuff like that, there are some sauces that you can put on, what's called brags. And it's basically like a soy sauce, but it's got essential amino acids in it. And so people who are vegetarians will often like put that on their rice or in whatever they're cooking. And so that's another way that they can make sure that they're getting the diverse and essential amino acids they need. Okay, so carbohydrates, fats, protein. Vitamins are certainly other important things that we get from our diet. Some of our vitamins can be synthesized, but most of them come from our diet itself. And they get classified into two categories. Some are fat-soluble, and others are water-soluble. So water-soluble are going to be vitamin B and vitamin C. And so for those vitamins, those are ones that you can't really overdose on, right? Because they easily go into fluid, they're filtered out by the urinary system, and so anything that you're not using, you can get rid of very easily. So that's why, if you're not feeling well, there's no, prescription for vitamin C. It says, oh, you can't take more than this because, you could hurt your liver or something like that, right? So vitamin C, you can take whatever, emergency or any of the other ones, and you can get 10,000 units of it, and it doesn't hurt you. So vitamin B are like that. Vitamin B, you'll find it in multivitamins. So sometimes if you find that your urine takes on kind of an orange color after taking a big multivitamin, those are usually the B vitamins, the excess B vitamins that are being filtered out. Our other vitamins like A, D, E, and K, those ones are fat soluble. So vitamin E, not only is it important internally, but a lot of people use it externally, right? It comes with vitamin D oil, so that reminds you that this is fat soluble. Vitamin A is carotene, and so carotene, when we were talking about vision, right? So that was carotene is what your body uses in order to synthesize the retinine molecule, the part of the dopamine molecule that captures light in your photoreceptors. And so vitamin A is the carotene molecule that actually has, it's basically a pigment. And so any of your vegetables that have an orange or reddish color, the redder they are, the more of that vitamin A they have in them. So red bell peppers and of course carrots and squash and sweet potatoes and all that type of thing all have vitamin A in them. So your body uses that. Vitamin D is interesting. Technically, vitamin D is a hormone that's synthesized in your skin, activated in your liver, etc., and it helps your intestine absorb calcium. And so that's why it's activated by sunlight hitting your skin. So that starts the whole process. So you talk about, oh, I need some more sun, I need some vitamin D. You hear about people that live, whatever, in the Pacific Northwest or even in the Midwest or something like that that don't get a lot of sunshine and they worry about getting enough vitamin D. But now, of course, when you go to the store and you buy milk, all the milk is vitamin D fortified, right? So they're actually giving you that substance along with the calcium to make sure that you can absorb that calcium properly. And then vitamin K is important for clotting and things like that. But those fat-soluble vitamins, those are ones that you do have to worry about getting too much of those, because just like fat can be hard for us to get rid of, these vitamins that get stored in fat can also then be hard to get rid of, so they can accumulate a bit more easily compared to the water-soluble ones. So, for instance, like vitamin A, when I was going through undergrad, like you guys, I was working my way through, and I worked at a grocery store, right? So I was a laser technician, right? And so this guy that would come through, and he'd always go to the produce department, and he would get those naked juice, like fresh carrot juices, and you could just see it in his skin. I mean, his skin actually looked orange like that. His face, palms of his hands and stuff like that, where you can see where the coloration comes from, the underlying tissue a little bit more. That subdermal fat that we see, right, in the hypodermis, that's a lot of where that vitamin A, excess vitamin A, can get stored. And so, it doesn't have any particularly toxic effects, but it can change the coloration. Happens with babies a fair bit too, because if you look at the ingredients on the baby food jars, whether it's like mixed vegetables or whether it's like those meal ones or whatever, most everyone in it has carrots. So like the mixed vegetables, the number one ingredient is going to be carrots. And so they're getting carrots like just about every meal except for maybe breakfast. And so they will accumulate too much of that vitamin A, that carotene as well. And so, you won't notice through time because, it's a gradual change. And so then after a while, you're like taking them in for an appointment, they're like, yeah, you need to cut down on the carrots a little bit, go for green beans for a while, and let some of this kind of work its way out of their system. So it's kind of funny. Okay. Minerals. You hear about vitamins and minerals being necessary to your diet. Minerals are going to be derived from the soil. And these are going to be much smaller in terms of, the components of our body. But as you can imagine, they're going to be necessary for our harder tissues, right? So bones and teeth are going to need some of these minerals, right? We're talking about calcium phosphate and things like that. So calcium and phosphorus account for about 75% of the minerals that we have in our body. So those are called the major minerals. And then we have a variety of other minerals that are important in other systems. So for instance, magnesium is important in muscle contraction and things like that. So the minerals are important for our diet. And then there's these things called trace elements. Trace elements make up, right, less than, 1,000 of our body weight. But when we look at it, those components are going to be pretty critical. So for instance, iron. What's so important about iron? Yeah, so when we look at, iron, it's going to be important like in the cardiovascular system with the red blood cells and the hemoglobin. That's going to be a necessary component to be able to bind oxygen. Iodine, we didn't talk a lot about this, but that thyroid hormone that comes from the thyroid that works to control metabolism, an essential part of it is iodine. In fact, it's so critical that if you look at salt that you would buy at the grocery store, you'll notice it says iodized salt. So been an agreement among salt manufacturers and the FDA and stuff like that we all need a certain amount of iodine in our diet in order to maintain a healthy thyroid to allow it to synthesize the thyroid hormone properly. And so, okay, everybody uses salt, and so you put it in the salt, you make sure that everybody's getting it. If you live near the coastline, the natural source of iodine for our diet would be like seafood. So if you look at, have you guys ever put like iodine on a cut or something like that? Or you've seen iodine anyway? So what is iodine? What's the color of iodine? Yeah, it's like a yellow, brown, something like that, right? And so if you look at, and again, marine biology kind of percolating into the class, if you look at the different algal types, there's green algae, there's red algae, there's brown algae. So if you think about, like in Southern California, if you look on the coast of whatever, LA or San Diego or something like that, you see big kelp forests there. So that's a major brown algae there, and there's, as you can imagine, a lot of organisms that feed on it, herbivorous organisms, and then things feed on that, it goes up the food chain. So if you eat fish that eat on the brown algae or somewhere in the food chain, then you get iodine is a major component of the brown algae. And so you get in your diet naturally that way. In fact, crops that are raised in the sediments along the coastline, iodine will naturally be found more in those sediments. And so even crops that don't normally have a lot of iodine will have more if they're grown along the coastline. So if you go to the center of the country, not quite so much. So making sure that the salt is going to be an important thing. So, now there's this trend about people using specialized salts, right? Sea salt as opposed to regular iodized salt, or, other types of salts and stuff like that. And so mostly there's enough salt in our diet from lots of sources that it's not really a worry. But if you go to like third world countries, etc., and they don't live on the coast, you can have lots of people that'll have thyroid conditions because they're iodine deficient. In fact, there's a condition that they call goiter, where the thyroid gland actually gets huge. I mean, you're talking like bigger than a softball or something like that. Because what happens is, that whole control system, right? You get the hypothalamus, which stimulates the pituitary gland, which stimulates the thyroid gland. And so, when your metabolic rate is too low, those management levels of the thyroid gland increase its production. So it works and works, and it puts out thyroid hormone, but it doesn't have enough iodine, then that thyroid hormone won't be functional and won't work on the cells. And so if management looks at the body, sees that the metabolism hasn't gone up, and says, hey, thyroid, I told you, start putting out the thyroid hormone. And so it stimulates it some more. So what happens is, the thyroid works harder and harder and harder, and when we work body parts harder, like muscles, they get bigger. And so it's just working harder and harder to meet that demand, and it can't, because it doesn't have enough iodine. So it's really, you can just say, you can Google it, Google goiter or something like that, you'll see people, it's really huge. It'll actually go back, hypertrophy, and then it will go back to its normal size if they get iodine in their diet. So anyway, these types of trace elements are essential nutrients where you only need a little bit, but they have really critical functions in the body. Okay, so in essence, what we've been talking about with nutrition and diet and stuff like that is it's important to get enough calories, but in terms of the cells, right, we want to make sure that we're giving them the nutrients that they need to build, to live, to undergo their maintenance of kind of day-to-day activities. And so, in fact, you can be taking in enough calories, your 2,000 calories a day or whatever, but you can actually still be malnourished. You can still be in this condition of malnutrition because whatever, you're only eating one thing, right? If you just ate cereal or something like that, that's it, you wouldn't be getting the diverse nutrients that your body needs. So, something to be aware of, to be sure. So this is our message, right? At the end of the digestive system chapter, it seems kind of simple from the beginning, but in essence, there's a lot of things that goes into this process of digestion and nutrition, etc.